Hello and welcome to Mabinda TV. So for now, I'm looking at the top headlines in Africa, and one of the top headlines in Africa is about Ibrahim Traore. So basically, danger to his life. Ibrahim Traore dissolves all political parties. So that is Ibrahim Traore dissolving all the political parties, and I think maybe that's the question that you need to ask. Can why did Ibrahim Traore dissolve all political parties? Is there a danger to his life? Maybe that's what we need to ask, and I think that's why then we need to be able to really interrogate that question. So, of course, a lot of people view Ibrahim Traore as being the president of Africa. So, basically, they think that he is the one that is going to liberate Africa. And Ibrahim Traore basically is a benevolent dictator. And I think in an era where democracies have failed to function, then I think you have Ibrahim Traore basically you have Ibrahim Traore being the one that would help to bring about development. So one of the projects he is pursuing is social housing, number two, new roads, number three, national airline, number four, national airports, number five, container depot off the coast of Ghana and an inland depot in the on the border with Niger and Mali, and of course you have a post bank, and then you have a university polytechnic, then you have a tomato processing plant, a gold processing plant, and a cotton processing mill. So that's it about Ibrahim Traore. So then I will move over to another headline, top headline in Africa, that is Vice President Lupo pushes for expanded China trade. So can we do more business? Should we be doing more business with China? That's the question that we need to ask. Should we be doing more business with China? And I think basically, we should not be looking at the West with its 600 years of black subjugation, nor should we be looking towards to China. We should be looking inwards to ourselves. That is, we should be looking inwards to ourselves, and I think that's the way that Africa is going to prosper. So we need to be looking at how we can prosper as Africans. And one of the ways is by doing trade, by trading with ourselves. The intra-African trade is only 10%. Imagine that the intra-African trade is only 10%, while the intra-Europe, intra-North America, intra-Asia Pacific trade is over 50%. So how can we be rich if we cannot do business within ourselves so that the West and gets to stay right here in Africa? So that's it from Daily Monitor Uganda. Vice President Alupo pushes for expanded China trade. So that's it from the Daily Monitor Uganda. Then I'll move over to another headline. Another headline: a new social protection policy brings Tanzania's informal sector workers into national safety net. So this is about socialism. Basically, Tanzania has been big on socialism. Basically, the founding president Mwalimu Julius Nyerere wanted socialism to define the way that Africa could be known. And you have Julius Nyerere, he tried to compare with this policy of Ujamaa, that is African socialism. So basically, Tanzania has been towards that path, and you find that and the reason why it does not agree with Kenya on the East African community is on the question of socialism. So basically, I think you have a lot of socialism that I think could go a long way in making Tanzania really, really. You could go a long way in making this could go a long way in making Tanzania and Kenya pursued capitalism, Tanzania pursued socialism. So I think that needs to change. I think there needs to be concerted efforts between the East African partners. Uganda is midway between socialism and capitalism, but Kenya is fully capitalist country. So I think this could be a new way Tanzania's social protection policy about pursuing Nyerere. So Nyerere really was an admired leader, but then of course African socialism failed to take, and that's the difference between socialism and capitalism. Essentially, the difference between socialism and capitalism is how do we is capitalism how do we bake the cake? Socialism, how do we share the cake? So that is the profound difference between those two. Then I will move over to another headline from the Citizen Tanzania. Tanzania's medical tourism agenda gets major boost with KCMC's STEAM surgery. So basically, this is about KCMC's medical tourism. So basically, this is about KCMC's medical tourism. So basically, should should there be more basically medical tourism? Why do our leaders travel? Why do our leaders travel to outside countries for medical tourism while we have qualified doctors in Africa? Whereas we have quality doctors in Africa, I think that is the way that we should be doing more in order to protect. We should be doing more in order to protect the in order to protect to enhance think about the traditional medicine. Our medicine men used to train for life. They used to know all the common solutions to diseases. So basically, I think that is why then we need to we need to have our hospitals to have a level 6 referral and teaching hospital. Then I will move over to Daily Nation Africa. From Daily Nation, House senators, governors, senators, and Holy Alliance leads to looting of funds. So basically, that's about oversight of Kenyan governors. I think there needs to be more oversight so that then they would be able to so that then they would be able to we can check on corruption. The Kenyan system is a bit of federalism and a bit of decentralization, but there have been accused that what Kenya really managed to do is to devote corruption, and I think that is something that we need to maybe ask what is it that we can do so that then so that then you don't have a lot of people, so that you don't have funds being looted. I think there is no Kenyan governor or Nigerian governor that is not a billionaire. So you can imagine the kind of funds that were appropriated. There is no Kenyan governor or Tanzanian governor that is not a billionaire. So you can imagine the amount of funds that were appropriated. So basically, I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be concerted efforts on and there needs to be concerted efforts on how these funds can be recovered. Corruption kills Africa. Kenya basically devote corruption and services. Corruption means no drugs in hospitals, no teachers in classrooms. It means no corruption means no roads, no roads. And so basically, that's something that we really need to think through. Then another headline from still from Daily Nation Kenya, how we turned our D's in KCSE exams into success. So the KCSE in Kenya is the high school exit exam. So basically, even if you are a D student, there's a pass for you in life. So that shows that basically, even if you are a D student, there is a pass for you in life. And basically, maybe that is why there is a lot of caution. There is a lot of saying that basically students work for these students. I don't think that's entirely true. I just think the cases of these students that are painted as a success, we never paint the ones who never wanted to do anything. But I think education helps to I think a bit, think in a certain way it develops better citizens, but I think then we need to sharpen our education system so that it is not just for grades, it is not just for exams, but it is for basically it is about doing something so that it is about basically coming of age of skills, something that even if you don't get a job, you can self-hire yourself, and of course creating better citizens for the country. So that's it for the Daily Nation Kenya. Then I will move over to another headline still from the Standard Kenya. While William Ruto splashes millions, Kenyans stare at death. That is while William Ruto splashes millions, Kenyans stare at death. So this is about the drought situation in Kenya. So the president is splashing millions towards maybe poverty elevate towards saying that youth can form their own businesses, but then you have that these businesses are not able to generate employment. But then, of course, you have the drought situation in the northern Kenya. So you have, on the one hand, President Ruto giving goodies worth millions, but on the other hand, you have the tribe situation in that country. So that is something that the president must be able to change, and I think that is something that the president must be able to change, and I think it is something that he ought to do something about it. Then still from then still from from the standard group from the standard in Kenya, how ODM, that is an opposition party in Kenya, can boost its value ahead of coalition talks with the ruling party UDA. So this is about, do you think there should be a coalition party? Do you think there should be coalition talks? Do you think there should be coalition talks between the opposition and the government? So that is something that I think we need to be asking. That is something that I think we need to be asking. So basically, I think coalitions are not doing well in Africa. Look at the coalition between the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, the one that he has been doing with many the coalition between doing anything for the rounds, and I think that there needs to be concerted efforts on how these coalition talks can work, and I think if this coalition usually the opposition party ends up scared, and I don't think it's an African problem. I do think it is also, look at Nick Clegg in the UK with his Liberal Democrats Party. It got hammered. Look at, of course, the US has such nothing, has nothing like coalitions. Look at South Africa. ANC has a coalition. ANC has coalition with the minority white party, that is the DA, but that is not amounting to anything at all. So that's it from that is the standard media. How ODM, the opposition party, can boost its value ahead of coalition talks with the ODA. Then still another headline: Israeli envoys bid to make Kenya a startup nation. That is, Israeli envoys bid to make Kenya a startup nation. So Kenya itself, as a Silicon Savannah of Africa, as the Silicon Savannah, basically as the giant sleeping of Africa, where the startup activity takes place. But then, of course, the question to ask is there really and the question to ask: is there really uh, is there startup activity? I think the lack of venture capital in Kenya and in Africa in general, I think it does a disservice to so many Africans. The lack of venture capital, I think it does a disservice to a lot of Africans, and I don't think this augurs well for Kenya and Africa in general. So that's it from standard media, Israel always bid to make Kenya a startup nation. So basically, that's it from standard media. Israel and a startup nation, and of course, Israel itself is a startup nation. So we'll see how that will go. Then, still from the new vision, Uganda, General Muhoozi and the political economy of African sovereignty. So basically, General Muhoozi criticized the U.S. that it aided the escape of Bobby Wine, that's the opposition leader. So basically, General Muhoozi and his political economy of African sovereignty. So basically, should there be should African military be and military? Maybe that's the question we need to ask. Should African military be dependent upon Western military? And I think that's something that we need to ask. We need to be self-sufficient. We need to be self-sufficient so that then we have so that then we can make our own decisions. And I think if we don't have a sovereignty, then we will look at Nigeria, where the U.S. launched military strikes in northern Nigeria. That's something that I think we need to be thinking through. So that's it from the new vision Uganda, General Muhoozi, and the political economy of African sovereignty. So that's it from the new vision Uganda, and then I will look at another headline. My country, Somaliland, recognizes our first embassy would be in the G state, whose aspirations and history we share. So that's about Somaliland. So basically, it's a breakaway region of Somalia. It has a fairly functioning economy, but then of course you have a lot of basically it has its passport is not recognized internationally. That is Somaliland. Its passport is not recognized internationally. So how can that be? How can that be that the passport of Somaliland is not recognized internationally? And I think that's something that I really think we need to think through of how then uh, that passport can be made. And I think ever since the overthrow of Siad Barre in 1991, Somalia has not known peace. It has been a very unstable region, and so Somaliland, with a fairly big economy, its capital Hargeisa has a bustling activity. So basically, they have their own army, they have their own laws, they have their own elections, and so the breakaway region of Somaliland has been recognized by Israel as a separate state. Then I will move over to another headline. A political allied settlement over the election could legitimize the Somalia's fragile state. So this is still from Iran online, and this is about the instability in Somalia. So when will Somalia get peace? That is the question we must be asking ourselves. Then from this standard, Ethiopia inches ever closer to war, of course, that as reported by the Economist. So basically, Ethiopia the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has been on a military offensive on the Tigray region. So basically, you have him winning the Nobel Peace Prize, but then of course that Peace Prize does not say anything of the fact that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is basically hell bent on is basically hell bent on that this price does not excuse the fact that Ethiopia has had a war on the northern region. That is that is something that I think we must really think through, and I think it is something that could really destabilize the region. The Horn of Africa is a deeply unstable region. You can see the Somalia, you have Djibouti, you have Eritrea. The Horn of Africa is a deeply unstable region. And so and when Ethiopia goes after the Tigray region, then of course you can see that that is a drawback. Of course, the 10 autonomous regions in Ethiopia, they see the power of the central government wants to usurp the authority, and so they basically resent the overlay of power of the Ethiopian central government. So that's it from the Addis Standard. Then another headline that is still from Addis Standard. The Horn of Africa risks becoming arena for Gulf rivalry as Ethiopia drawn into power struggle. So that is Horn of Africa again being a deeply unstable region. So what will Ethiopia do? What will the rest of Africa do? What will the African Union do about the Horn of Africa region? So that's something that I think we must really come through. And then still another headline from this is from La Nation Djibouti. From La Nation Djibouti, India on track to become the world's third largest economy. That is according to the PM Narendra Modi. That is India on track to become the world's third largest economy. That is PM Modi. So basically, India is about to become another unstable country in Africa. So basically, how do we enable India to be self-sustenance. And I think India wants to, so there will be two economies. It will be the United States, then China, and then India. So a lot of countries of Asia, you have South Korea, you have Singapore, you have Malaysia. So a lot of Asian countries are usurping the Western countries. So you have India. India got passed by China. So you could ask, why was India surpassed by China? They were at the same level of development in the 1980s, but then of course China pressed ahead because of a centralized system, which meant that decision making was faster, which meant that decision making was faster. But then you ask yourself, and then you ask yourself, why is it that China pressed ahead? I think maybe that's why that's a call for dictatorship. That's a call for benevolent dictatorship that has worked for a lot of Asian countries. India practiced democracy, which meant that bureaucracy was entrenched. Decision making, basically, you got decisions that were delayed, and I think that's something that I think we need to really think through. So the Land Nation Djibouti. Then still from Land Nation Djibouti, higher education training to become independent. So a lot of countries are grappling with in Africa and maybe elsewhere in the world. What kind of an education system should they be having? Countries, what kind of an education system should they be having? Should the education system be about should the education system be about training for the skill or for the mind? So a lot of African countries higher education is in tatters because it is only teaching. We don't do research in a lot of African countries. I think the World Bank in the 1990s advised African countries that what they needed was basic education and not higher education. So they trained a lot of these African countries trained their sites on access to basic education. So they forgot about higher education, and a lot of higher education is in tatters in a lot of African countries. And then you finish university, there's no job. But a lot of African countries now say you need to be a job creator and not a job seeker. But that's a horror statement because what are the right conditions for creating these jobs that for becoming a job creator? Entrepreneurship is now a buzzword in many countries in Africa and maybe also across the world. Entrepreneurship, a lot of universities are also, maybe this is inspired by industrial universities of the United States, such as maybe Stanford University or maybe Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, where you have these universities, their students come along and create universities that can create universities that can create companies, create churn out students. And look at Stanford, basically where Google was founded, where Yahoo was founded, where Sun Microsystems was founded. Look at MIT. According to a report by the Kaufman Foundation, which is a non-profit that advances entrepreneurship, according to the Kaufman Foundation, the companies created or co-created by the alumni from MIT, they will be worth at least $2 trillion. That will make it the 11th largest economy if it were a separate country. So think of those and think of that inspiration from the US. And think of that inspiration from the US industrial university. So maybe what we need to create is industrial university. And then you have another debate, the liberal arts. This is mainly a debate that is going on in America, I think, where the liberal arts basically about the liberal arts and whether the students pursuing arts programs have a future. So basically, you have the liberal arts, you have former president, you have the president of Kenya, William Ruto, asking of what use will studying Vasco da Gama help you, and then of course you have basically another you have Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni saying that the study of arts was useless. So basically, you have that you have that you need to think about the kind of education system that we need to adopt. Then another headline. Presidency seeks 38% budget increase for 2025-2026. That's about from Radio Tamazut South Sudan. So basically, why are we spending more money on the presidency? These leaders who are impoverishing us, African leaders are impoverishing their people, and I think really Africa has rulers who are interested in the traffic of power. It does not have efficient person governors that are it does not have efficient Persian governance that may be involved in optimize efficient Persian governance that optimally use resources so that their people can prosper. And then, of course, I will move over to another headline. Another headline, Kenya-led mediation express delay into Minnepistok. So this is about the mediation efforts in South Sudan, another conflict in South Sudan. Remember, the opposition leader, Riek Machar, from the Nuer tribe, is under house arrest. So basically, this independence has meant nothing for the people of South Sudan. So that's something that we need to think through. This independence has meant nothing for the people of South Sudan. And what then can South Sudanese people do? What then can South Sudanese people do? And I think it is something that I think a lot of people, Africans, really just have to think through of how then and this is something that we need to African-led solutions, African problems, African solutions to African problems. That's what the likes of Thabo Mbeki have been advocating. But why is it that South Sudan is in conflict? It is about the tribal-driven politics. You have in South Sudan the Nuer versus the Dinkas in Kenya, Kikuus versus the Luos versus the Kalenjins in South Africa, the Hausas versus the Zulus in Zimbabwe, the Shona versus the Ndebele in Nigeria, the Yoruba versus the Igbo, the North versus the South. So basically, I think that is something that we really need to think about. That is, how do we have that is how do we have more how do we have more African solutions to African problems? How do we make our countries stable by pursuing politics based on ideology. Our politics is based on tribalism, not on ideology. We don't have a left of center party that's about socialism. We don't have a right of center party that's about individual dynamism. So that is something that we really need to think through. So that's it from the Radio Thomas with South Sudan. Then I will move over to another headline. I will move over to another headline. Sudanese group suspends participation in French-led peace process. Sudanese group suspends participation in uh, uh, French-led protests in French-led peace process. So, for how long will outside forces come and tell us to put our house in order? If you cannot put your house in order, then you have no business for self-governance. That's just it. If you cannot put your house in order, then you have no business for self-governance. And this is why then we need to make sure that we can have we can have African Union. What is the African Union doing? I think it is just a club of dictators extending favors to each other. That's what African Union is. It is a club of dictators extending favors to each other, and I think that needs to stop. Africa must really find African solutions to African problems. We must not be told this is how you need to do it. A gun must not be put on our head so that we can sit down and talk. That is something that I think we need to change. That is something that I think really needs to change if we are going to go forward. Then another headline from the Guardian Nigeria Central Bank's CBN's regulation and Nigeria leadership vision in fintech reality. So a lot of areas that receive a lot of funding for startups is the fintech and entertainment. It is fintech and entertainment. So these are the two regions that experience funding in a lot of from venture capitalists. So basically, Nigeria has a lot of activity, but also a lot of that activity is regulated for fear that it will be abused. So maybe internet fraud has been rampant in Nigeria. That's why, and then you have a central bank of Nigeria in a lot of that regulation. So Nigeria has $1 billion, has a few unicorns. A unicorn is a startup that is valued at $1 billion. So basically, that is something that I think needs to change. And I think then, if that changes, then Nigeria could be on a long way to being the startup capital of the world. Then, still another top headline, CBN's regulation and Nigeria's leadership vision in fintech reality. That's about still about Nigeria leadership in fintech. So that's about. But why don't we have a startup culture in Africa? What can create a startup culture? Number one, we have the talented people. So that means universities that produce highly talented individuals that we don't have in 2021. Out of the $625 billion that went to startups, only 1% of that amount went to Africa. That's $6 billion. Why Africa has so many problems, and the fact that Africa has so many problems, that is an opportunity for that is an opportunity for maybe that's an opportunity for that's an opportunity for entrepreneurship. Remember, entrepreneurship is about a solution. Remember, all entrepreneurs are businessmen, but not all businessmen are entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs look at a problem in the market, they identify a solution, and then if they provide a solution at a cheap enough cost to the consumer, then they make enormous amounts of money, and that's how money is made. So venture capital. And the business model of venture capital is that they fund lots of startups, and so with small amounts of money, let's say maybe $100,000, and then out of that startups, maybe of course majority will die down, but a few will become blockbusters. They will be the Googles of tomorrow, the Facebooks of tomorrow, the YouTubes of tomorrow. Then out of these startups, a handful will be blockbusters, and that's how they get to be able to they get to make their money. So they make their money through equity ownership. So basically, if you want debt financing, then you can go to a bank. But if you want equity financing, then you can go to a venture capitalist. So that's it for the Guardian Nigeria. Then I will move over to another headline from the Guardian Nigeria. Nigeria spent 3.5 trillion naira importing raw materials locally available. Nigeria spent 3.53 trillion naira importing raw materials locally. So this is about this is about Nigeria spending all that amount of money. So why shouldn't we use locally available materials? The fact that the Made in Africa brand is made to look inferior quality. That's the problem. The more that the Made in Africa brand is of inferior quality, that's the problem. That is what needs to change, and I think that's something that a lot of African countries can do. And I think the Made in Africa brand does not have to begin great. It can start out average and then gradually increase in quality as the Japanese and other brands did. So you had in Japan, you had that in basically you had that the Japanese brands did not begin out. You have brands such as maybe Toshiba, Toyota, Panasonic. They did not begin out great, but with reinvestment of profits back to R&D, they were gradually they surpassed Western brands in quality. So that's it from the Nigerian. That's it from the Nigerian Guardian. Then I'll move over to another headline. U.S. deploys 200 troops to Nigeria. So this is from Punch newspaper in Nigeria. That is U.S. deploys to Nigeria again. Solutions to African problems. What happened to that? Why is it that outside powers want to provide us with security? That's what we must ask. Why is it that us outside powers want to provide us with security? That is something that we really need to think through. Then I will move over to another headline that is from Punch. Cuts fuel price